Welcome to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. We're discussing James Varney's latest investigation that raises the question, what happened to more than 300,000 migrant children the government can no longer account for? During the Biden administration, nearly 500,000 unaccompanied minors crossed the southern border, far more than in any previous administration. Those children were placed with sponsors. An Inspector General report shows the government doesn't know the whereabouts of hundreds of thousands of them. For many, there is no address on file, and for others, calls and court notices went unanswered. Some groups in charge of the minors are unwilling to address their whereabouts, and others say that it's just a paperwork gap. But experts interviewed for the investigation say that doesn't match the scale or the risk that many of these children face. Some of the minors may be hiding from immigration authorities, but many have likely also been pulled into trafficking or labor operations across the country. Taxpayers poured $23 billion into nonprofits, contractors, and housing providers during the Biden border surge. Some of these groups saw their revenues and executive pay packages skyrocket. And when asked what the money was used for or where the children are now, most of them refused to answer. One major provider is even facing a federal lawsuit alleging years of sexual abuse in its facilities. The border may be largely sealed today, but the aftermath of the surge remains. And so does the question at the heart of the investigation. How did $23 billion system fail to keep track of children that it was supposed to protect? I'm joined now by the lead investigator on this story, Jim Varney. Jim, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Maggie.
So this is a pretty big issue with hundreds of thousands of people that are just unaccounted for. How has this issue been allowed to persist, and why are there no repercussions?
Well, the first question, I think, is pretty easy to answer, and that is that the system was just completely overwhelmed by the numbers. If you look at how many unaccompanied children or minors under the 18 had come to the country prior to 2021, it had been, in fact, in 2020, it had only been a little over 15,000, and then it shot up to more than 100,000 for the next 2 years. So we had somewhere in the neighborhood close to 500,000 recorded in the 4 years of the Biden administration. And that's those that, of course, encountered border control and people, agents and whatnot. Gotaways, we don't know how many that would be, but let's just call it 500,000. That overwhelmed the system. It wasn't equipped to deal with numbers like that. And now in terms of your second question about accountability, it's difficult to see exactly what went on. The people that were involved in dealing with this and were paid by the federal government to deal with this, none of them would respond to us. Senator Charles Grassley from Iowa has also been looking at this, and he says that he asked some of the same questions and has not gotten satisfactory answers. So it's hard to understand right now exactly how all that money was spent and how so many were able to go missing.
I mean, it really just sounds like a broken system that there's so many groups that should be held accountable because they got millions of dollars. So you'd expect some sort of, is it reciprocity? I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, but you'd expect some sort of due diligence done by these groups to be able to then just provide basic information such as the status of these minors or where they are.
Well, right. In some cases, they got billions. Now, perhaps they have submitted paperwork to the federal agencies, right? You would think that if you're a contractor or a grant recipient from the federal government, that you're required to submit some kind of paperwork to show that you're living up to the terms of all that. Neither the groups nor the federal agencies involved with this, primarily the Office of Refugee Resettlement, none of them responded. So we have no idea exactly how this has been policed or how this has been accounted for. That still remains unknown right now.
And so it kind of seemed through your reporting that the issue has somewhat faded from public and political attention, even as this number is so substantial. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's what first attracted us, right? So a year ago, more or less, at the vice presidential debate, J.D. Vance brought this up and said, look, there's more than 300,000 unaccounted for minors. How is that possible? And what's happened to them? Now, that figure is a combination of a couple different subsets, right? Like some of them, around 40,000, we literally have no idea. Apparently, there's not even any paperwork on. And then the primary group, the biggest group, are ones that they couldn't deliver a notice to appear in immigration court, which means that they've gone somewhere. We just don't know where. And I think that what Vance was talking about was obviously something that touched a nerve, because everybody responded, said, oh, no, it's a paperwork problem. It's this and it's that. I don't think that anybody since then has bothered to look at it. So we were like, what happened to these people, right? Like, why was this an issue a year ago and no one's talking about it now? And then the thing that really struck us when we did start to look at that was that how much money had been spent on this, and we still can't get an answer for most of these kids. Now, we should say that most of them, we don't know what percentage, but a majority aren't accounted for because they don't want to be accounted for, okay? Like several experts we talked to said these people are either with families or people that don't want to draw the attention of immigration authorities. And so it's a voluntary thing. People shouldn't think that there's hundreds of thousands of kids that have been trafficked or something like that. But it still means that we don't know exactly what kind of situation people are in.
And to speak about the trafficking of it all, obviously that was something that researchers and advocates were saying is a very real issue that are facing these unaccompanied minors that came over the border, some of which were put into potentially pretty unsafe conditions. How much do we need to really, bring up that discussion and bring it to light that this is an issue with human trafficking over the border?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think that Grassley and I think it's Bishop in the House, there have been some congressional hearings about this. And as we mentioned, it became a topic in the vice presidential debate. It's not really clear to me why nobody's talking about it now, right? Because one of the first things we thought was, okay, if the Trump administration has fixed this problem more or less or made it a lot better, you'd think that they would want to trumpet that and brag about it. Meanwhile, the people that can't stand Trump, if he hasn't done anything or it's gotten worse, you think they would want to criticize him for that. So we were a little taken aback by the fact that neither side wanted to do either. And I think that if you bring more light to it, obviously we should be able to find out more. We should be able to find more answers to what happened to the kids. But I can't speak to where the desire for that is, I mean, I feel like it's something that people have talked about and we're trying to bring it to light again. And as I say, there has been some congressional hearings. It just doesn't seem to have really caught fire.
I mean, it's definitely something that people deserve to know is the case, especially when it's millions, in some cases, billions of taxpayer dollars. What does this story look like moving forward?
I think the key is going to be one, finding out what we spent so much money on, right? And I'm sure that the answer is probably it costs X amount of dollars to house a kid for a day in one of these places. And you now have 500,000 of them times however many days, right? But we spent at least $1 billion building out the infrastructure to house them. We know, because we looked at it from the tax returns, we know that some of these groups that were involved in the housing and all the people that are working for them have been very handsomely paid. So it seems to me that that ought to be step one, is figuring out why did this cost so much and what do we spend the money on? And then step two would be, again, assuming that most of these kids are voluntarily unaccounted for, trying to whittle that number down and make sure that we know how many are okay and how many aren't. Part of the problem about how many aren't, obviously, is somebody told Laura Lederer told me, it's all underground. So nobody has precise figures. The bad guys don't publish quarterly reports or anything. So it would be best if we could figure out first what kind of numbers we're talking about, and then secondly, track them down and I don't know if rescue is the right word, but get them out of the clutches of these criminal groups.
Is there anything else you'd like to add as we wrap things up?
No, I think just your point and your question about how can this get more attention, right? Like, how can people somehow be a little more concerned about this? Because even, let's say it's only a tenth of the kids, right? That's still 30,000 kids. And you do see scattered stories in the press about kids that have been caught up in trafficking. We linked to a couple of them, but the New York Times has done it. There was a recent operation in Memphis. So we should be able to find some of these kids. And I think once people start paying more attention to it, that's going to happen faster.
And hopefully the people in charge also start paying a little bit more attention to it.
That would be nice.
And That would be nice, and things get done. Well, Jim, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. I'll see you next time.